Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fight Site interview. Today, we have the pleasure and privilege of former UFC title contender, multiple time former UFC title contender, an amazing MMA wrestler, someone who some new fans should really go back and watch the fight footage from his time uh, at the top of the UFC Lightweight division. Gray Maynard, first of all, Gray, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me.
Absolutely. Before we begin, everyone, just make sure you go check out thefightsite.com. Incredible articles, amazing analysts. You know the drill at this point. Make sure you check us out on Patreon. You can support us directly, get access to the Discord channel, to get to ask questions for the Fight Site podcast, just tons of extra content that you would not get normally on the Fight Site. Follow us on YouTube, share, subscribe, like the video and comment. It really does help us out. And also make sure you follow us on Stitcher, Apple, and Spotify as well. Leave a comment and a 5-star rating if you could. All right, great. We're actually here to talk about a topic that's generally a little different than these interviews. Normally, I just talk about the fighters and the way they train and their styles and stuff like that. But this is actually a really serious topic, at
Right.
least for me and you, for sure, for you. Fighter pay. It's been coming up because, I guess, more because John Jones and George Masvidal have been making a little bit of noise, which is great. But you've been extremely vocal on Twitter and social media recently about the stories you and other fighters are coming out of the woodworks as well and talking about it a lot more recently. And I think it's really important. So what specifically got you to start being extremely vocal? And let's go from there.
Well, you have to bide your time a little bit, especially with the UFC. Anytime you're not a big star like GSP or John Jones or George, you're usually fighting paycheck to paycheck, and that means you don't have the ability to hold out as long, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what can happen is if you speak out, then the UFC gets pissed and gives you bad matchups. There's a lot of things that could happen. You could go on the shelf, or you could just talk about your pay and hold out. But how long are you going to hold out when the bills are due? The majority of the guys in the UFC roster, I would say 95 to 97 or 8%, don't have much of a holdout, period, with the money that they make. You get a couple guys who have their own gyms and can do that, but make a little bit of income on the side. But for the majority, like even if you're working a second job, it's not a job to be able to hold out too long. So what happened was 2018, we parted our ways. Um, that was after my Nick Lenz fight, and I've just been helping coach people, helping a couple different gyms, and just watching the same stuff happen. Like guys literally paying to be into the UFC. They'll spend more on their camps than they make in their fight. And it's just pissed me off a long time, and just going through it. There was never a payoff like in my career. I've probably fought for the title twice, numerous number one contendership, bouts, a lot of main events, co-main events. That was probably half my career, just in the main events. Number one contender, co-main events, and it just there was never a payoff. And I'm still watching it. Like these people are literally paying money to be in the UFC to train for bouts that all the bigwigs are pulling in hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. And based on the percentage of what they're paying us, we're talking about 15 to 18% of what they're making is going to us. And, you look at the NFL, you look at the NBA, you look at most pro sports, they're at about 50%, if not a little bit more or a little bit less. But you look at Bellator, 50%. You look at a lot of boxing promotions, even higher than that. And a lot of people don't really understand. And I was in a time period to where it was in a growth stage, but there was still a lot of money coming in, and when the company got sold off, I think the numbers were great, but it's not that the numbers were great. It's more of there's no rules protecting us, and there's no rules really on the horizon yet, other than the Ali Act. We're trying to push that, but like if you look at it, they can hold that down. They can try to push that back as long as possible. But when you control the rules of a game, you control the game, and that's what they're doing right now, because there's absolutely no rules that help us, that protect us as athletes. And if you look at the Ali Act covers boxing, it covers combat sports. Well, MMA isn't a combat sport technically below the Ali Act.
So it's interesting, and it's important for people to understand that when you say that there's no protections, there's really no anything, and it's paycheck to paycheck. Like, people don't realize that you guys aren't employees, or you're not classified as employees when you're fighting for the UFC. You're qualified.
No, so
Right. Go on.
we're
Yeah,
an
please.
independent contractor. We're an independent contractor. We get 1099 at the end of every year. And usually an independent contractor might be like if you hire a plumber, right? And the plumber comes to your house, does a little bit of work, you pay his company, and then he pays a little bit of taxes on that, whatever. He moves on to the next job. Well, we're basically like that. They're paying us to come in to fight, but here's the problem with that: we can't move on to the next job. As long as we're in a contract with them, we're in a contract with them. So if we hold out on a fight, they can. It's not like we can go anywhere else. Dana, he's said, well, John and George don't have to fight. Well, yeah, they do to make money. They have to fight with the UFC if they want to fight. They can't move on to the next promotion. They can't do anything. They have to fight for however long they contracted him for. And usually they try to get big names in on 6 to 8 fights. And usually they tempt you to, like, into doing that by raising your price a little bit if you go that way, right? And again, you're talking about a guy like George. He's come up through nothing. He's been paid nothing, been in the game for a long time. He's finally getting paydays. It looks nice, Hey, I'm just going to rattle like when I signed my 8-fight contract in 2014. This was after I was on the 9-fight contract, like after the TV show. The TV show, you have to sign it. It's a 9-fight contract. And what happened was I was basically 6 or 7-0, undefeated, beat Edgar, beat Clemente, beat Jim Miller, beat all these guys. And I started at like 8-8, like 8,000 and 8,000, 10,000, and you move up with each win, 10,000, 10,000, 12,000, 12,000, and I was probably at like 16 and 16 because I was 6 or 7-0. And, I call them up. I'm like, dude, you guys got to move my contract up. Like, and it was a pain in the ass to Joe Silva, and he barely moved it up. It was like 16 and 16 to like 20 and 20 or something like that. 21 and 21. And then, and the only reason I asked for that because I was fighting Nate Diaz on a main event for the #1 contendership, and that's what I was asking for, and it was a big deal to him, and so I beat Diaz, I beat Florian, I beat. Then they gave me the title shot, which I walked into that cage at 26 and 26. Then I went through a couple for contract. When I went into that cage at 26 and 26, gave them a pretty good fight. I mean, they probably play it, 300 times a year. It was a draw. It was title fight, one of the best title fights. Gave them everything they wanted. I got a standard bonus. I got a standard locker room, kind of bonus. And then 2 days later, Joe Silva calls my agent up and just basically haggles him down to the lowest price possible, which the next fight was 42 and 42, which no pay-per-view points, the same bonus, and that's it, and so that's when I kind of learned. I was like, this is there's no payoff in this. Like, this is a scam, but where else was I gonna go? Strike Force was a great promotion, but a lot of people looked at it as a local show, kind of a bigger local show in the San Jose area. You had a lot of champs kind of from that area. Everybody liked Scott Coker, but it just didn't really have the depth and the talent. So Bellator was kind of just getting going. Bjorn Remney, the verdict was kind of out on him, and but they bought out pretty much everybody else. And then in 2014, I was on a little slide in my career when I moved up to AKA and moved back and just took a little dip in my career. I was trying to do a lot of stuff, a lot of other stuff, trying to make more income and not depend on fighting as much. Because at 42 and 42, I moved up to the Bay Area. Dana called me after my last title fight, and he was like, I think you should move up to AKA. Ended up going up there, and 42 grand. If you lose a fight, that's like poverty up there, literally. And so ended up coming back home, and he called me in the office, and he had me sign an 8-fight contract, and I thought I was going to be able to get it done a lot quicker, but life happens and whatever. And but that's what they try to do to lock in people that they've put a lot of marketing money into and who kind of have names. Because once they lock you in there to an 8-fight contract, you go on a little bit of a skid. And this is what happened to me. I lost my first fight on that contract. He called me in the office again and asked me to retire, knowing that he just signed my 8-fight contract. So that's knowing that I'm going to have to go. In my mind, I got to go through that whole contract to be able to be a free agent. Because if I retire in contract, that means they own me still. Even if I come back, I can't go anywhere else if I retire in contract with them.
It's kind of like I mean, it's not kind of, it is. It's you kind of have all of the negatives of the independent contractor while all of the
Right.
negatives of being an employee. And you don't
Right.
really have any outs because you're locked into these long-term contracts. You don't have any way of renegotiating because they have all of the power in these negotiations. They can cut you at any time, but you can't leave the contract at any time. If you, like you said, you retire,
Exactly.
you're still stuck in that contract. You can't go anywhere. Uh, and you brought up how that title fight. Anybody who's watched that fight knows how incredible that fight was, and it was just like that first round. I think you got 10-8. You 10-8'd Frankie, and really, if there ever was a 10-7 round, that was it. Uh,
Yeah.
but like just going over the numbers of that pay-per-view, they sold I think 270,000 is the reported number, which is a sixth, and the average pay-per-view buy would be between 55 and 65, so it's 60. They made over 16 million in pay-per-view buys alone. Half of it goes to the cable providers, so 8 plus the gate. So this doesn't include non-fighter costs, so anything they have to do in the arena, but it doesn't include merchandise sales. It doesn't include any of that or any of that really. So you're talking about, and the total fighter reported payout was $1 million. So we're talking
Yep.
about maybe 10%. And we're based on all the numbers, we're talking about 15 to 18% maybe of their revenue goes to the fighters. But like you said, that's unacceptable. And there's no pensions because
Yeah.
you're employees. There's no mandatory health insurance. There's none of the benefits of being an employee. So
None. Absolutely none. It's like telling a plumber, you got to wear the Reebok deal, and you got to wear a Reebok, outfit, and you can't wear your own brands, or you can't wear anything else. You got to wear a Reebok outfit, and you can only work for me. That's it.
well, that was actually going to be the next question I had, like, because you were there for the pre-Reebok and the post-Reebok era. How damaging was that to fighters' ability to earn income using their platform in the UFC to get sponsorships? In your experience personally, as well as from fighters you have spoken to and trained with.
Right. Um. So a guy just coming into the UFC or prelims, especially if you've been with the UFC a little bit and you're on the prelims, I mean, it's probably about even, but you have to understand, like, you make relationships with, a lot of your sponsors, and you might be able to own stock in the company, or you might be able to work for them after you're done fighting, or there's a lot of different benefits of being able to have that, and even on the prelim cards, like, yeah, maybe it didn't kill them fighting it like dollar to dollar, but it hurt the opportunity to build your own business brand, and to work with other people, right? Now, where it did hurt a whole lot was people fighting for titles, people fighting for, a lot of main events. That's where it kills them. Even if you've been in the UFC for, um, however long it takes to get that 15 grand. And then once you get over 20 fights, it's like 20 grand. You could make you could make quadruple that. Like, if not even more. There was people making a couple $100,000 in sponsorships on each fight. If you were a big name or if you were a main event, now they're paying, like, only title fights 40 grand, and that's if you're a champ. And then, if you've been in the UFC for a long time, like 15 to 20 grand,
Yep.
that's a lot of money out of people's pockets. Prelim, it might be the same, but that takes away an opportunity to work with other businesses, to to create these contacts and to understand how this works and how much you're worth and you know
Of
there was a
course.
lot of opportunity in that in that aspect.
And it's kind of crazy when you were talking about how, like, after those title fights you were looking for other ways to make more money because your job, which is fighting, wasn't cutting
Yeah,
it. And
yeah, and
what
that
other
was when I was the best in the world too.
exactly.
Number
And
one, number
no
two.
no other sport you'll never hear a pro football player say, yeah, I got to get another job because the base pay is just not good enough, the championship level pay is just not good enough. But they start companies because they have that money to be able to secure themselves, as opposed to
Yeah,
you guys not having any other choice, which is crazy.
they'll
So
throw money into a business, as like an NFL athlete. I know a bunch of them, and they'll throw money into a business, but not have to put in any sweat equity because here's the money, here's my name. You guys figure this out, and pay me my dividends and that's what's happening with the UFC. There's a lot of like NFL athletes that threw in money and like actresses and actors and these are people that make a living because of a union, make a good living because of a union, and rules that help them to make the living, and they're throwing in money because there's big dividends coming back because we don't have rules. We don't have a union. We don't have anything protecting us, and it's like after I fought my after I fought my TJ Grant fight, you know, like I had to like figure out ways to do this and just I was remodeling a house, trying to prepare for Diaz again in a main event. Like working 8 hours a day, like on a house, like remodeling a house, but then going to train for a fight that, Nate Diaz is a tough opponent to train for, especially a main event card it was on Fox, I think, but it
I
was
believe
a main
so.
event card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was UFC on
It was
Fox,
the Ultimate
FX
Fighter.
or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh no,
Maybe
against Nate, it
FX.
was actually the Ultimate Fighter finale. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. But like, I couldn't put and that's what I learned coming up to the title fight was, you know, like I would barely break even. I would be kind of living off my sponsorship, uh, cash I earned and of course I won every fight, I was in, and that's I get half of my paycheck more. I get if I'm fighting for 16 and 16, I get that like extra 16.
Hmm.
And coming up, looking at the numbers, it was like, man, this makes no sense what I'm paying for training camps, but it's going to pay off. I know it's going to pay off. Keep working, keep striving, and I sacrificed a lot. And then once that title fight came and there was just no payoff, and I really had to reevaluate, how I looked at my training and how I looked at my expenses. And then, we a couple of fights after that, kid on the way, it just made no sense to put it all back into, and it's not like, I'm taking my sponsor money and I'm putting it back, I'm putting it into a bank account or whatever, and I tried to do that. Like I would take my bonuses because that's stuff that I can't expect and count on. I would put that away into retirement funds, real estate, whatever it is, because you cannot count on that. That's, I didn't know if they were having a good day, a bad day. You never knew what kind of bonus checks you would get.
It's yeah. And it's interesting that you're pointing out, you brought up the show win bonus. You show up, here's your paycheck, just like any other person who comes to work. But in
Right.
reality, half of your paycheck, what you're deemed valued as, which is severely undervalued, but we know that. If they're valuing you as 26, they're valuing you at 52,000, but they're taking away half your paycheck if you lost that fight, which is
Yes.
absurd. And
Yes.
fighters,
But
like
they
you
still
said,
get the same fight.
exactly,
Still
exactly,
get the same fight, but if you, yeah. But, again, I was kind of talking about the bonus checks afterwards, the backroom,
definitely want to
bonus,
talk.
because what they tried to do is keep you at a low pay to keep everybody to knowing that that would be reported like on the books. So 16 and 16, whatever it is, and that's reported on the books, that's reported on the websites, whatever. You have to give that to the commission. But then after a fight, they would give you anywhere from, like, I don't know, 2,500 to it could go up, and up. It depends on what card you fought on, and where you were at. There was a couple times I got like an extra 10 grand, but there was no like there was no sense to it. It was always like,
Arbitrary.
yeah, it was arbitrary. Obviously the bigger card that you were on, and the higher you were on that card, you got like a little bit more, but you could never count on that.
Right.
There was a time where, I fought Ryan Hall, and usually it was around Christmas time, and usually, like, I got a $2,500 bonus, because whatever, 3,000 maybe, the last couple. And with the Ryan Hall fight, like, I remember Dana, he called me up. He's like, hey, it was around Christmas time. He's like, hey, I want to put some money into your bank account for, Christmas. And I was like, okay, oh, that's cool. But I never got a bonus for that fight, right? So he told me it was like Christmas, but it was actually my bonus. But
Wow.
but because it was close to Christmas time, it was a Christmas bonus.
It's like when you lump the birthday and anniversary gift together.
Right? Yeah. So, and again, like, Dana's an amazing talker, and he's talked his way through, years and years and years of people complaining, and, like, people asking about, fighter pay, and like what's going on, and he just talks his way out of it. He doesn't answer questions, and he's been very good at that, but what I think's happening is people are really starting to get these numbers, and people who are getting these numbers are like financial people, lawyers, and really, smart people with the numbers, and smart people with laws, and are starting to understand it more and more, and seeing how bad it's been.
What do you think? I mean, we know that there's lawsuits obviously currently ongoing against the UFC.
There's an
Monopoly.
ant.
Yeah, an
There's a
antitrust.
Yep,
Um,
class action.
yep, and I think that's obviously important. But how we need, obviously we need to get people who are currently in the UFC on board with the idea of, I don't know if they can get a union because of the fact that you are classified as independent contractors. So maybe an
Right,
association, but what would it take? I know Leslie Smith is working with Project Spearhead really hard to push for a
right,
unionization of some sort. What do you think
right.
fighters need to do? How do you convince active fighters to get on board? Because, like you said, they fear
Active,
retaliation. So,
yeah. Active is hard, right? Again, and we discussed this a little bit, like, at the beginning, and that's just um, people have to put food on the table, and
Exactly.
Dana White knows that. He understands that, and that's what he's created. Again, you pay people too much money, they have power to to hold out and to be like, no, you're not treating us right, or no, this isn't right. So the majority of the athletes, you know, can't really do it, and I understand it. So um, I'm not really expecting a lot of current athletes to jump on board just because they can't.
Right. They
And
can't afford
so,
to.
you
Literally
know,
cannot afford to.
yes, and again, it's keep them hungry. Keep these people hungry, literally, to where they have to take fights. They have, which is like, he talks about how boxing is corrupt, and it's not good because people are dodging people, and it's just like, no, they're not dodging people. We're fighters. We fight. That's what we do. But the numbers don't make sense at the time. It's like, no, this doesn't make sense. I'm not going to give you all the money, right? Or this guy, Floyd and Pacquiao, that would have been a great fight, like in their prime, but they couldn't agree on the numbers. Which, why do you have to? Why is it okay to starve a person to make them compete against each other? Why is that okay? You know, and for like our enjoyment, or for you to benefit, off this, Dana and all the promoters to benefit, majority of it. So that's kind of what's happening, is a lot of people will go hungry if they don't fight.
It's interesting, and it's important for people to really understand what's going on. It's and a common refrain that we keep hearing, both from people like Dana, and people who are within the industry and in the company who are benefiting from the current system, as well as, I would say, less educated fans of the sport and what's really going on. Generally, the less hardcore variety will say, "Well, you just don't sign the contract. You sign the contract. Too bad. Deal with it." And Joe Silva stories, I think, was the hashtag. Uh, you've given a few examples of manipulation used by people like Joe Silva, Dana White, to coerce and manipulate fighters into signing these contracts and keep them down. How do you, how do you convey that to them and say, like, no, we don't really have a choice here?
Yeah, and that's kind of why I'm trying to get more of the past athletes to kind of share a little bit more, just because I don't want to put the current, on like on the spot. I'm really glad that George and John, stepped up, and but it wouldn't be fair of me to be asking current people who are under contract, to stand up like that. So I'm kind of going after like a little bit more of the past athletes, and just getting stories out there. So after my title fight, where it was a draw, and again, it was a big deal, and normal, normal backroom bonus, normal, pretty much everything. And Dana all pumped up, he's like, man, that's great, pat me on the back. But again, 2 days later, Joe Silva, it was good cop, bad cop. Joe Silva calls up. He's like, I don't even. He calls my agent. And, I don't even like feel like he should be getting the title shot, and blah blah blah. And actually, after the fight, Dana wasn't even at the press conference, and he gave it to. He said Anthony Pettis was going to be going, next, and because it was a draw, and so it's hard to say, like, no, I'm not going to sign that contract when you're already dealing with like a person that doesn't even want you to have the title shot, right? And you're right at the verge of your dreams and your goals, everything you've worked for, you've bled, you've sweated, you know, you've done all that you could, you know, and you know, it's hard to, you know, to tell people how that feels. Oh, here's a contract. You got to sign this. Okay, but you know, I don't like it, but it's like, I got to get this title shot. I want this title shot. I've worked everything I've had. You know, I've put money back into this. I haven't made much. You know, this might be it. This might be that time. You know, and that's what I feel as if it is you know, just a carrot dangled in front of you.
Before I pivot to a separate portion of the negotiations, which would involve managers, and your thoughts on the general state of MMA management, just can you tell people who may not know just how much it costs monetarily to do these fight camps, to be a fighter, just the costs associated with it, and how much fighters have to spend from their own money in order to be able to just get to the cage?
Right. And so usually I do it like with $100,000, just because it's pretty easy. But
Perfect.
let's do it on 10 grand. Let's do it on 10 grand, just to make it easier. Just because there are people, you know, on a 10 grand bonus, or, you know, on a 10 grand, you know, if they lose a fight.
Right.
15% goes to taxes usually, you know. Take 1.5 off of 10 grand. Then you're talking about a management, you know, usually 10%. There's another 1,000. Usually 10%, 10 to 15% goes to your training, your coaches, not even your training, your coaches. You usually have a striking coach. You usually have a grappling coach. You might have a head coach, you know, to kind of organize your camp. You get 3 people in your corner, you know, if you're not a main event. And so if you have 3 real coaches, you have to pay for them to come out there, and you only get 2 flights. Now, not 2 coaches' flights, 2 flights. Your flight, you know, and the coach's flight. So you have 2 more coaches you have to fly out on your dime. You get 1 hotel room where everybody's supposed to stay in. Not 2 hotel rooms. If you get 2 hotel rooms, you buy that. You buy you buy the extra hotel room. So, you know,
Not
where are we
including
at?
any,
So
not including
15,
any
what?
supplements either. You're not including any supplements or
Oh,
extra things like
food,
just regular.
training. If you
Yeah.
go away to train, I know people that come out here to use the PI that have to pay for flights out here, have to pay for an Airbnb, have to pay for hotel rooms, whatever it is, you know. And if you're only doing, and I know people that are literally at 10 and 10 doing that.
It's
And so you're talking about, just with what we're talking about, like, where are you at? Like $3,000 now? Like,
I
that you
may
have?
maybe maybe.
Maybe you eat out for a camp, you know, for, you know, each week of a camp, you know, that's another like $500 or whatever it is. And I mean, just the cost of like supplements, the cost of it adds up so quick. It adds up so quick. And then you look at an NFL, you look at an NBA. You know, I know players. They don't spend a dime on anything. They're training. If they hire a private coach, maybe to keep them kind of in shape, or they like a different, you know, strength and conditioning coach, maybe. But they get their meals for free. You know, they get that. There's you know, a ton of stuff. And, you know, again, I don't want to get on that too
Right.
much, but like the way we're doing it, you know, that's a 10 grand pay scale. Even at 100 grand, you're walking away with maybe half of that. Maybe.
And just to really hammer home the point, the reason why the yeah.
And here's another thing.
Mhm.
If you do get hurt, you're on the shelf. You make no money.
Exactly.
You make no money. And maybe when, and that's the thing about the sponsorships. When we could get sponsorships and we could work with other, sponsors, they were still getting a cut of those sponsors. The sponsors had to pay them a hefty sum to be allowed in the cage.
Oh yeah, they had the sponsor tax, which was supposedly
Yes.
to protect fighters from iffy
Yes.
sponsors, and in reality, fighters came out and
Yes.
were talking. I remember there was talk also
Yes.
like you've actually made us lose sponsors.
Yes. Also, um, I've never heard this personally, but I know a lot of managers were kind of talking about it. And like I only try to tell the truth of what I know, but I'll explain stuff that I haven't heard, and I'll try to clarify that. Like I never heard this personally, but a lot of managers would say the sponsors that they were dealing with, the UFC would call them, and like ask them like, hey, do you just want to be in that, like on the cage, like instead of sponsoring the guys, to take the money, especially
That's
if it was especially if it was a big sponsor,
that is that's bad. That's I have actually
yeah,
never heard that before. That is really
yeah,
messed up.
yeah. A lot of
Just
big sponsors would get calls, like from the UFC, who, because they research who has money, who's a big time sponsor, and that's where you see a lot of the sponsors, like on the billboard, or like on the the like on the padding,
yeah.
on the mats, and that's what I heard from some of the agents, is they were getting feedback off of the actual sponsors, like, hey dude, like I got a call from the UFC, trying to get us like on the mat or on the post.
That's that's just actually stealing money, trying to steal money from the pockets of the fighters to just that. Wow. Okay.
I Yeah, and
I'm not
and
surprised, but
that's just that's just it's just ruthless, and that's what the UFC is. They're ruthless. And a lot of people that I've heard have worked with them, they're like, dude, they are so hard to work with, because they want everything. And a person gave me a number. I think it was John Fitch or Nate Corey. They're in that lawsuit, but they gave me a number, like the UFC makes almost, it was definitely over 90% of every dollar spent on MMA.
I mean, I, I definitely want to. That's it's ruthless and just that's pure greed too because that's
Yeah.
they were
Now, I
still
don't
gonna
have
get paid from the sponsorship tax.
verification on that.
Right.
Like, I don't have verification on those numbers, and
Right.
again, I heard this off my own ears. All the managers would say that, and again, it was bigger sponsors, which that was kind of few and far between a lot of times, but they
Mhm.
had the money to be on the cage, and they have people researching that. It wasn't going after like a small sponsor. It was kind of like, yeah, well, they pretty much don't have enough money, you know, to spend on that. But as far as that other number, that's what I'm pretty sure John Fitch or um, Corey told me, and it actually, they told me higher, but I'm just trying to be a little cautious, and say about like 90% of every dollar spent on MMA goes to the UFC.
Wow. I mean, before I pivot to the MMA management questions because I do want to know how agents and management work compared to other sports. But just as an aside, something you said before, they're let alone the unions and associations, but just the concept of paying for your athletes to be the best they possibly could with the training equipment. It makes sense from a logical standpoint. You want to be able to give the best product possible so that you make the most return possible. And when you're basically forcing people to starve themselves, they're not going to be able to perform the best way. Like you said, you were working on a bunch of different stuff during your fight camps and you weren't able to fully dedicate yourself. And I'm sure that's true of a lot of fighters.
Right.
Moving to the MMA management sphere, what is your experience personally within that? And how do you feel they do with working with the UFC? Do you know of really good examples of managers or agents that really went to bat for their fighters, or of maybe doing the opposite where they made sure to just try and get the best deal they possibly could for themselves? Anything that you know about in that sphere of influence?
Right. And I want to back up real quick.
Oh, go for it.
Just to kind of clarify how it was. So you take me in Bisbing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bisbing, he was a new market. He was he won the Ultimate Fighter, which I forgot who he beat on the Ultimate Fighter.
Jason Lambert, I want to say. I think that was the finals or something like that.
Yeah, good memory. But you look at his career compared to my career, and because he was a new market, because of whatever he did, like our pay wasn't even close to what they wasn't even close to each other. Right. And and that's what they do is there's no standards, there's no there's no rules. I literally went 10 fights without losing. One was a no contest, went 8-0, and then that was 9 fights without losing, then had that draw with Edgar. So I was pretty close I was at 10 fights without losing. And I was still getting haggled to be at 42-42. Whereas you look at a Bisbing, he would have been, if he went 8-0, almost 10-0, I mean, he would have gotten paid a lot more than me. Guaranteed.
Well, he got, I'm looking it up now. He got 150 for his fight with Dan Henderson. And that was 9 fights into his UFC career.
Okay. And now the backroom bonus.
Yes.
The backroom bonus, I can say he probably made a couple hundred off that.
And to be clear to anybody listening, you're definitely not saying that he shouldn't have made that. It's the opposite. It's that he should be making that and more, and so should everyone else when you're being robbed, essentially.
And you see that progression. It's easier to be like, dude, okay, I'm not making what I need to make, but at least there's progression. At least I'm putting money away. Whereas people that are kind of I don't want to say I was expendable, but I wasn't a new market. I wasn't, that type of person, as him. And it just got to the point to where, this is turning out to be a fucking expensive hobby.
It's you weren't
and a damaging hobby.
Yes, it's actually important to bring that up because people kind of forget that, we watched those crazy fights. We watched the fight you had with Edgar where you damn near, I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. You damn near killed a man in the cage, literally. And that's damage he's never getting back. years potentially off his life. You know,
Yeah.
people get hurt. You brought up TJ Grant. He was ready to get a title shot post-concussive syndrome, and he's done. His career's over, and he's gotten. I hope he had something
and
left
I think our fight, was what happened,
Right.
and after that, he was dealing with a lot of post concussion, and there's a lot of people that have dealt with that. I know a handful of guys that have literally retired because of that and haven't seen a dime to help, with that. No, he had to scramble to get his life back. A, because of the issues he was dealing with, and B, just trying to find a job. I think he had to go to work, as up in his area is like a lot of mining,
Right.
And he went into that, great guy, really great guy, tough competitor. He was a smart competitor, tough competitor, just all around, just all around a tough guy to beat. And it would have been nice to see him get the title shot. It would have been nice to see him to get the belt too. He was a great guy. He still is.
Absolutely, and of course we wish him the best. I hope he's not still suffering from that kind of stuff, because I can't imagine what that's like. I was speaking with Eric Anders, and he was saying, he currently works for the UFC. He's a UFC fighter, so we didn't bring up fighter pay necessarily, but he said, I'm not going to be able to do this forever. So any money I get, I'm immediately doing. He says he got married, and that's what drove him towards that. But he is trying to do whatever he can to invest in certain things, real estate, different businesses. You were talking about doing that later on in your career. Is that something that you really recommend starting right away, at least for now?
Yes, of course. I mean, there's retirement funds, there's stock market, there's real estate, and again, I put a lot of money into real estate,
Mm-hmm.
and then '08 hit, but then then it was coming back, and you're still putting it in there. Try to live off as little as possible, and try to put what you can't count on. And this is even what the UFC said in their fighters summit that they bring people out to, is live off your guaranteed money, which a lot of times, we're talking 10, 26,000. Well, for me, 26, 42,000. My last fight, I was at 50 and 50. So, I made 50 grand, plus the sponsorship stuff, the Reebok deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I got 2 kids, I got, a mortgage, and that's that was kind of Dana's spiel too, anytime he talked to you, just pay off your house, and, that'll be good, just kind of why are you telling me this stuff? I don't get it. Is it just to keep me at that mindset? I just want to pay off my house, or what? And, it was definitely frustrating. And don't get me wrong, it's great to have a house paid off and
Right.
and whatever, but what happens if you pay off your house and you have no money to live on?
And then you're retired at 40.
Then you got to sell your house.
Exactly. Or you got to find a new job when you spent the last 20 years working on a particular skill set that has no other application other than opening a gym to teach other fighters. So
right. And everybody, and our kind of goal, our goal was, last half of my career, I was making a good amount of stuff off real estate. Ally Quinta is doing a great job. He's doing real estate. He's using his name to do that. I do it a little differently. I'll put money into kind of spec properties, and I flipped a couple houses and whatever. But we put our money, or we put our time and our money into getting my wife through her master's program, which is functional health and kind of medicine, and it's basically, the way I could describe it is more of a holistic doctor, and
Sure.
that was our big deal is without health there is no wealth, and we definitely want our kids to be healthy. We definitely want me to be healthy, our whole family to be healthy, and also we see everybody just kind of steering away from all the pharmaceutical conventional drugs and
Right.
doctors to more of like the way it was, how to heal through eating, how to heal through nutrition, how to heal through lifestyle change,
Right.
because and that's kind of where we're heading, and we want to help a lot of fighters with brain health. Brain health is really, there's a big component of that's directed towards your gut and how healthy your gut is. There's a gut brain connection, and that is where a lot of people lack. If you don't eat nutrient dense foods, if you don't have the right bacterias in your gut, that affects your brain. And then you add a bunch of pharmaceuticals on top of that when you get a little depressed, that also like messes up your brain as well. So it's I think a lot of pro athletes go down that rabbit hole, and it's just gets worse and worse. So we're trying to come up with stuff that
Right.
we're going to be working on here soon, just to obviously help people in general, but to help athletes and also kids. Kids are they're developing at a rapid age. 0 to 10, their brain, their base, their foundation of health, right? And we definitely, this world, it really is nice to have a little bit of money and to be able to be free of that, but to have your health, it really, it means a lot, and we want to help people to achieve that.
That's really awesome, and it's important to obviously brain health in a sport where brain damage
Oh
is
my
kind of
God.
the thing. The
Right.
yeah. So it's actually really important for people to know that. So I can't wait to see what you're definitely.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for when you start talking about it.
Appreciate
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, please. Because I've had a few concussions. I've
Yeah.
gener which is obnoxious because I got them doing jujitsu and not boxing. But whatever.
Yeah.
We'll call
Yeah.
it.
And like that's there's a lot of research coming out, and we try to deal with a lot of research based stuff is your body's able to heal a lot of your organs, heal like on its own, and especially your brain. Just because we get concussions and just because we are in this sport doesn't mean that's how it has to be. It doesn't mean we have to hurt it even more through our nutrition and through our just lifestyle choices. So there's a lot of research out there that does say that our brain can heal itself, and if we take the precautions and we take the right steps, we can get better.
Uh, we're at the hour mark, but I actually wanted to um, also before I move on to the next thing, yeah, definitely. If you are listening, please make sure that you follow up on this stuff because I'm actually curious to see the work that you're going to do with athletes, and hopefully it's well publicized so that people really get involved in that. Um, but moving back to the, I think a prior question, it was about MMA management. If you still have some time,
Yeah, I'm
I
sorry about
definitely
that.
want to know.
Yeah.
No, of course, I am curious. I mean, MMA management. Then throughout your career, agents, I guess, is a different term than just
Yeah.
management. Uh,
Right.
what kind of function do they have in the MMA sphere with the way the UFC negotiated? And also, do you feel like they've generally been, um, I guess, beneficial to fighters, or have they more kind of like worked with the UFC to keep them down a little bit? Curious about your thoughts on
Yeah.
that.
You know, so coming up, I thought, um, I thought a manager and an agent were the same thing, but usually in a pro sport, managers and agents are different, right? This we're talking about NFL, NBA, but in MMA, it's basically the same thing, right? Agent, manager, whatever you want to call them. You can't afford both. So their role was to basically, when I was coming up, to get you sponsors. They took 20% of that, because they're actually going out to get that stuff. 10% was going to your purse. You usually gave them about 10%. I know a lot of people that paid upwards to 20%, which I never paid that. I paid 10%, and I didn't pay a manager or an agent until I got to about the main event with Nate Diaz ish, just because I was able to get my own sponsors, and but then about that time, it was more lucrative to have an agent do that, and to get me sponsors and to take 20% of that. It made sense. But also, usually what happens is they take over your fight negotiations, and they talked to Joe Silva and had that barrier between you, which, looking back on it, and even now, like, there's a little bit more room to maneuver now with managers to negotiate who you're going up against. But that was pretty much their main job, was to get you an opponent. And with Joe Silva, it was basically take it or leave it, type of deal. And when the negotiations came up, for a contract, over 90% of the guys were here's the offer, take it or leave it. They might throw a low ball offer at you, and you might be able to work up like off that, and that's just kind of letting you kind of feel like you're getting more, but you're not. It's just they went really low, and now you worked up. Anderson Silva, he might have had a little bit more leverage. GSP, like all those guys had a little bit more leverage to maybe negotiate, and those guys were kind of negotiating more with Lorenzo and Dana, but um, the lower guys, which is 98% of us, even if you were fighting for a title fight, it was mainly you were dealing with the Joe Silva. And again, managers and agents, they have to do what they have to do to put food on the table as well. And there wasn't really a lot of room to do their job. So,
Right.
but they tried to make you think that they were doing their job, and look, I negotiated a great fight, for you, or whatever it is, and really it was just Joe Silva called, I got two options, and you can take this or this, and so that's kind of how that negotiations went. And again, for a long time, I didn't have a manager. And then pretty much when I went on a little dip after the TJ Grant fight, I lost a couple more times. It just wasn't wasn't making sense. I had a guy and a good guy. We were close but it just didn't make sense. Like as far as my money's concerned, to pay bills, to put food on the table, to have a manager,
Right.
and that's obviously when I got locked in a couple fights after that to an 8-fight contract.
And kind of to kind of bring it all together. I mean, I think most people at this point would agree that the best way to get fighters to improve their bargaining, collective bargaining, would be through an association, through expansion of the Ali Act, or a union that would be ideal as well.
Yeah.
What, in your opinion?
I would really, I always kind of thought that we should be a part of the Screen Actors Guild, like SAG,
Right.
because these people are getting paid off. Obviously, the Ali Act is where we got to start,
Right.
first and foremost. But again, I didn't see any residuals off that, like off the Edgar, off the Edgar bouts. I didn't, I got bonus, I got paid, and that was it. And there was no standard to how much I got paid. And Screen Actors Guild, I mean, there's a little bit of negotiations, but it's all, I'm still getting checks off like little TV shows and kind of movies. I did because of reruns and because of stuff like that. So again, there's not a lot of thought into that, but just kind of putting it into into an idea. I'd like to see us like be a part of that, where prelim is, even if it's like an extra almost, to where there's standards of what those extras get, and not a lot of thought into that, and people could probably tear that apart, but just anything is better than nothing. Yeah.
I've never actually heard that before.
Because I don't know how much they've made off selling the fights to these programs, ESPN to Fox, and there's got to be money tied into that,
Absolutely. I mean, they're for sure making money, and they're getting viewership, and they're holding views. I mean, I can't count the amount of times I saw it on when it was back on Fox, and they were playing something on FX, some fights or something there, Fox Sports 1. How many times did I just sit in there? I'll go watch. It's easier for me to do that. And I mean, I guess before we wrap it up, like, what do you think it would take? What do you think is the first step that fighters would need to take to really get the ball rolling on these things and push back, I guess? And is it just through former fighters and people like that? Would it take a John Jones or George?
Yeah. Well, again, I think it does take like bigger names who have the ability to hold out and to speak up. And, we can't count on these guys that are, the guys and gals who are just trying to put food on their table. We can't put them in that spot because they do have to make money. And, I think bigger names, and a long time ago, there was a couple interviews, and like, I think, the Diaz brothers are going to be more known in the long term than a Conor, because you look at, everybody compares Conor to Ali, but, Ali is really known and went down in history because he stood up for his rights. He stood up. He sat out because he didn't go to the war. He stood up, for a race. He stood up for countries. There was a lot of things beyond boxing he did to make him a legend. And and the Diaz's are kind of that way. They've always stood up, for like what they believe, and they've lost a lot of time because they stand up for what they believe in, and Connor has really been more about the money than anything, and I don't see him, I see him donating to, a lot of, organizations and stuff, but, I don't really see him standing up for the little guy and standing up to make change, in a lot of areas. And, there's a lot of great athletes that have come through many sports, and they're known, but to become an icon, you have to go beyond the sport.
I mean, I could not sum that up any better. Gray, I appreciate immensely the time that you set aside to talk to me about this. I think that it's important to have people like you come on and talk about these things, because the best way to get awareness is to get the word out. The best way to make change is to create awareness so that people actually push for it. And I appreciate you coming
Right?
on here so that we can hopefully do that.
Yeah. And that's going to be making the change is just keep people talking about it, and just keep getting the truth out there, because the truth is what opens, like what opens eyes to a lot of the problems. And again, it's like, I'm standing in line for a cup of coffee. It's like, hey, Gray Maynard, right? Yeah. Hey, you fought for the UFC for so long. Awesome. Yeah. Love that fight with Diaz or Edgar. Yeah. He's like, man, I heard you guys get paid terrible. And this is like a conversation that's happened so many times. And we do it a lot for the love, Okay, cool. Hey, do you mind if I just ask you, like, what did you make off that, Edgar fight or whatever? You make about $1 million or something? What? No, I was guaranteed 26 grand. And then it's just like, it's like almost awkward. They're just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
They kind of look at you like you're stupid. And it's like, hey, I don't know what to say, So, and that's the stuff that, like, people know, but they have no idea, right? It's like, oh yeah, those guys are getting paid terrible. I bet they're only making like $1 million or something. It's like, okay.
Well, I don't even like it's. I would honestly have you come back on just to maybe get into even more nitty gritty details of individual stories at some point, but in the future for sure. So again, Thank you, Gray, for coming on and speaking with us to get awareness out about the issue of fighter pay. It's something that personally for me, I hold near and dear to me, because I know so many at this point, so many people who kind of just get screwed all the time.
Yeah.
So,
and it's only going to get worse.
Correct.
There's a lot of people who are dealing with a lot of long-term damage, and with no backups, with no help, on their injuries, on anything. And, I think it's time. It really is, time that it starts getting out there. And again, we all appreciate your help, and we all appreciate you giving us the platform to talk about it.
It's our pleasure. I mean, we do this because we love it. And, if we can do anything to give back to the fighters who provide us our entertainment, to the sport we love, I mean, that's what we'll do. So
awesome.
Thank you again, Gray. Everyone, just make sure that you go check out thefightsite.com, the Patreon, follow us, share, subscribe. Please make sure you share this interview in particular, even though I mean this for all of it, but this one I think is incredibly important because it affects every single one of the fighters who we.
Last thing.
Exactly.
Last deal is obviously, I kind of mentioned the Diaz's. They were doing it for a long time, but now that John Jones and George are kind of stepping up, they're hopefully their name kind of goes down, in history as well, and hopefully they're not bought. The UFC has a tendency to, kind of, again, I have no research and no facts, but like,
Hush money.
people hold out and hopefully they don't just get bought out, and they kind of stick to their ground.
I hope you're right.
For reasons other than just themselves.
Right.
Right. But I think long term it will help their name and their legacy, if they do stand up for, the rights of all the athletes.
And hopefully I would say that they end up being the catalysts for a change rather than a small blip in the overall history.
100%.
Again, thank you. And remember, everyone, check out the Fight Site and all that. So this has been Ben Cohen with another amazing Fight Site interview with Gray Maynard. Make sure you check Gray out on Twitter. He's been talking about this stuff a lot. So make sure that you follow him on Twitter, Instagram, every bit of social media. And yeah, anything that you want to plug, by the way, before we go?
Nothing really, just, a lot about the Ali Act, just a lot about the stuff that's going on, and anybody who supports the sport, you should support the athletes.
All right. Well, thank you all so much, and have a great day, Gray.
You too. All right.